the curriculum cycle. When you watch the previous material on genre, we presented very briefly the curriculum cycle. I think it came up in the history video. And in that, we briefly mentioned the curriculum cycle, which is building the field, deconstruction, joint construction, and independent construction. So this is a genre-based cycle, which is sometimes called the teaching and learning cycle also, and it was first utilised in Australia. Its successful application to teaching writing to standard Australian English speakers and EALD and non-native speakers of English, standard Australian English, has proven itself an effective approach. So the cycle is based on the notion of scaffolding, which draws on Vygotsky's work, his view that higher thinking processes, including language, arise as a consequence of human interaction. So this was further developed by the Sydney School genre theorists in the 1980s, and it supports the understandings and skills that need to be developed in order to write. And there are 4 stages: negotiating or building the field, deconstruction, joint construction, and independent construction. And I guess you can think about this as building on the genre approach with a more contextualized view to meet some of the limitations of the approach that we presented earlier. The cycle's purpose is to scaffold students as they develop control of the subject matter, so what it is that they're actually writing about, and the structures, text structures and language features in the written mode. So we're going to unpack each of those and give an example. So building the field. This stage of the process is really, really important because it's about building knowledge of what it is that you're writing about. And so the cultural and social context of the topic needs to be built and developed. And it's really about having a deep understanding of the what it is that you're writing about. So the subject matter. Students need to participate in a range of experiences, including engaging with a variety of texts. So this is before writing begins and is an ongoing process that develops as students read, write, and think about the subject matter that they're writing about. So here is an example. If you are thinking about writing about cats, okay, you'd need to go and learn about the classification, where they live, what they look like, what they eat, and the things that they do. So part of building the field is really about it building on everyday knowledge and extending that. So as it happened in this example, one of the students from a class was particularly knowledgeable about cats and was invited as an expert to share their knowledge. They have quite a lot of information, and as they spoke, the teacher wrote some notes on the board. The students asked lots of questions, and so more information could be added. And it sort of turned into a bit of a graphic organizer, which a graphic organizer you could sort of plug the structure and pop in different content. So perhaps other students might use the same graphic organizer but choose a different animal to write about. So during this process, the meaning of unfamiliar words, so some vocabulary work, was discussed, and the teacher was able to draw attention for the students to the growing bank of technical words, things like habitat, classification, reproduction, feline. And the students were encouraged to reflect on other ways of gathering relevant information. So they could actually observe cats, access digital resources such as websites, watch videos of cats, talk to people who have cats, visit a pet shop, and reading books about cats. So there was a discussion in particular about the role of books in providing information and of how to find relevant information on books by using the tables of contents. So here you can see a great relationship between reading and writing. The teacher distributed a number of reference books on cats directly from the school library, and so some of the books were too difficult for students to read independently, so she was able to do some modelled reading and share some of the information via those texts. Students worked in pairs to find particular information, a fact from each book. They needed to discuss what they read and agree on the fact. So you can see some higher order thinking coming in there. There were discussions on appropriate categories on the graphic organizer to which the fact might belong, and so on. A bank of facts and knowledge about cats and the vocab, all of that was being developed in building the field, and it was done collaboratively through a range of modelling, interactive and shared processes. As the above summary indicates, the teacher had sort of taken some notes as a collaborative joint piece of writing, and used this as a model for the students to teach them how to note take. It was agreed that note taking saves space, and some of the notes were rewritten by students into full sentences in which they then could feed into their own written work as they became independent writers. Deconstruction of an exemplar text. So as indicated on the slide before, the teacher was concerned not only to build field knowledge of cats, but to build knowledge of language. And the teaching of knowledge about language included discussions of the overall organisation of the information as part of the report genre, discussions of various aspects of cohesion of texts, and also quite detailed discussions of aspects of sentences and clause grammar. So an important feature of the unit overall was the extent of the emphasis on learning about language and the fact that teaching about language arose from and was integrated with other activities. So in order to model the structure and features of information reports, the teacher guided the students in reading and analysing the following texts, which was similar to the one they would be writing jointly, but sufficiently different that it still involved new information. I'll let you have a read. Before discussing the organisation of the genre, the teacher spent time doing guided reading activities, ensuring that all the students understood the text. There was some initial discussion of unfamiliar words, and the teacher led the students through the text with focus questions directed at the level of the whole text, and then paragraph, and then down to individual sentences. In terms of the stages of the genre, the students were encouraged to identify the function of the opening stage of the text, the general statement, which introduces the topic. Then looked at the description stage, so a number of phases where information is organised into bundles of information, perhaps making up some paragraphs, and then referring to the planning that was done before and using that graphic organizer to help bundle that information, so classification, appearance, habitat, etc. And no particular sequence necessary with those, and so but just the fact that that information is bundled together. The teacher drew the students' attention to typical grammatical features of information reports, comparing them with narratives to that of an information report on dogs and the story of Prowlpuss, which is a really great way to highlight how audience and purpose changes language choice and structure. Okay, so children were able to talk about how verbs were used differently, for example, and how tense was different. They also identified the main participants in each text and observed that the narrative, the name Prowpuss makes the cat into an individual or even human-like, whereas in the report the term dogs is a general name referring to all dogs. And so really exploring the language features and structures of the text. The teacher then drew students' attention to the role of technical terms in reports and was able to explore that, even comparing the two different texts. And the final activity was that based on the model, information reports was designed to focus students' attention on the way in which these reference ties worked within and across the text. The students, again, working in pairs, were able to use highlighters and tracked the references to the main animal described in their model text so that they could, understand how cohesion worked throughout the text. So a whole range of different types of activities in the deconstruction phase. Hopefully some good examples there. What about the teacher-student joint construction of text phase? So this is where the teacher and students write together. So by this time the students had a good idea of the overall structure of an information report and were familiar with some of the language features. They had developed their knowledge, their content knowledge of the topic of cats, or the content knowledge of cats, and so they were able to contribute information collaboratively. They were ready to carry out this joint construction. The teacher and students wrote the first paragraph of their report together. The students suggested the wording of the paragraph. The teacher wrote the suggestions on the board, and this involved some quite extensive negotiation and some redrafting this process. But the completed, jointly negotiated first paragraph goes like this. Cats belong to the family of felines. They belong to the same family as lions and tigers. There are many different types of cats. We can put them into two main groups: pets, domesticated, and wild, feral. The students were then divided into pairs, and each pair then wrote one other paragraph, either on appearance, habitat, diet, behaviour, etc. And the students were encouraged to talk to each other about what are you going to write and how are you going to write it. And so that negotiation needs to happen between the students as they were jointly writing together as well. And so then the paragraphs were discussed and shared with the whole class. So the students revised when necessary any sections of their own paragraphs. Then each paragraph was cut out and stuck in sequence onto a large piece of paper. So the resulting jointly constructed information report is shown on the next slide. But I just want to point out here that with the joint construction phase, it's really important that as the teacher, you don't sit down for an hour with the whole class and jointly construct a whole piece of text. It's too much, and it needs to be chunked. And this is a good example of how you can sort of negotiate what that joint construction sort of might look like in the classroom. Okay, so you can pause and have a read of that if you like. Then we move to student-independent construction of text. So students now apply their new understandings of the topic and the text. So it may be a new related topic or another aspect of the topic of study. So here you need to be really careful that by going through this process, that if you then want students to write a report about cats, then that's okay. They're drawing on the resources that they've developed throughout the process, that you've developed collectively, and that's okay then to feed into their own independent writing. because they still have to select the right words, put things in order, recreate their own sentences, etc. So they're still doing their own independent writing. If you want them to then apply that knowledge to a different topic, so say all of your modelling, deconstruction and joint construction is around cats, and you then want them to write an information report about a different content such as dogs or their favourite animal or whatever it is vitally important that students go back to building field knowledge, okay? And they need to spend lots of time building that field knowledge so that they've got the content knowledge to actually write about their topic. So they might have the detailed knowledge of the information report, the genre, the structure and the language features, but they're not going to be able to do that well unless they have the content knowledge and the vocabulary knowledge, the technical vocab of their particular area of interest first. So it's really important to go back and spend time on that. And so the students in this phase had been advised to follow a similar process to that used in collecting information about cats. And so the students had done some research at home, they had done some research with the librarian at school, and there had been some time in class where there was modelled, shared, guided learning experiences available for them to develop their content knowledge in what they wanted to write about. And some examples are shown on the next slide. So using these notes as prompts, students began to write their own reports. So this text indicates that this particular student is developing very good control of the genre. The text is organised, they're able to use the language features that were taught, the guidance and support provided for these students is clearly assisting their spoken and written English language development, which is great. It's what we want to happen. So to review, the teacher designed a unit of work based on the curriculum cycle. The cycle is based on the Vygotskian notion of scaffolding, where students are provided with support from a more experienced other in the context of shared activity in order to achieve outcomes that they would not otherwise have been able to achieve on their own. The curriculum cycle generally involves an initial focus on developing the students' understanding about the topic and the language needed to discuss the topic. It then moves on to the teacher modelling the genre, looking at how it is organised in terms of the typical stages it goes through and some of its key language features. This phase might also involve intensive guided reading of the model text. The teacher then supports the students in writing an information report collaboratively, providing them with a demonstration of how a more knowledgeable writer goes about developing a text. Once the students have experienced the process of gathering information, categorizing the information, and jointly writing it up into a coherent text, they then go through the same process for themselves, independently researching a similar topic and writing their own reports in this case. So, thinking about our beloved continuum of literacy instruction, where we're thinking about modelled, shared, interactive, guided and independent writing, think about the phases of the curriculum cycle. How might the pedagogical approach of the continuum of literacy instruction support the teaching and learning throughout this cycle? Can you see alignment? Is anything different? I want you to revisit the cycle and look at the examples provided and listen for those key words: modelled, shared, interactive, guided and independent. And I think you will see some clear alignment between the two pedagogical models. Importantly, what we do know about the teaching of writing is that encouraging students to write for audiences and purposes, and regular and extensive shared, guided and independent writing experiences have been shown to be effective. And we know that explicit scaffolding of the writing processes improved text production, self-motivation and reasoning skills as well. And of course, you'll be exploring this in workshops, and I look forward to that.